Yeah.
Okay.
So what's recording now?
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Miss Nikki Alfar right now. An award-winning writer, a prominent writer in speculative fiction here in the Philippines. And today we're going to interview her for her writing careers, the beginnings and the trials and tribulations, and what she thinks as her role as a writer here, writing in English in Philippine literature. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you.
I guess I'm just going to ask, what got you into writing?
I grew up in a house full of books. I read everything. When I was 8 or 9, I think, I found out that Franklin W. Dixon, the author of the Hardy Boys, was not one person, it was many people. Many people writing under the same pseudonym. And somehow that made me think, so anyone can do this shit. Can I say shit? I'm sorry, I'm very foul-mouthed. So that was it. I just decided to give it a shot. I was dreadful, but you get that.
So, what made you choose speculative fiction? I mean, you are a prominent writer in speculative fiction. So, and it's also in our research, you were inspired by Tolkien, Nikki, and Stephen King. So, what made you?
You've done a lot of research. Well, the Stephen King thing was, I was younger even than 8. And I read so much, I had run out of books. And I had read all my books, all my brother's books. I went on to my mom's books. But one of them had a big paw print on the cover. So it's like, hey, great, it's a puppy book. And it's really thick, so I'm going to read this puppy book. Which turned out to be Cujo by Stephen King. Which was vaguely traumatic. But I guess it informed my tastes. So I like the weird and wonderful. I guess it shaped the way my brain works. That's my weird brain. It doesn't make sense unless there's something strange about it.
So growing up, based on our research as well, you grew up in an Filipino-American household. How did you manage to navigate towards these two cultures?
I was very, very American because I was a beauty and you die if you cannot. So that's the only time I started learning. It was a long time before I realized that weird, not exactly American, not exactly Filipino upbringing was also in a way very Filipino because we're such a melting pot of cultures.
So how did that shape your writing? How did you navigate through American sensibilities and Filipino sensibilities in your story?
I went through a difficult period in college where I was told that my experience of the world wasn't a valid Filipino experience. So like everything I had to say was the word was bourgeois. It was very upper middle class, very privileged. And I didn't have anything, I guess, to contribute, was the idea to the general Filipino readership. And this stopped me writing for like 20 years. Until I was, early 30s. At which point I had a child. I'd been married for a long time, so at that point, for some reason, in my 30s, it came together for me that, my experience is my experience and I am Filipino. It's a Filipino experience. So I have things to say and I'm going to say them and hopefully someone's listening.
In our culture right now, especially in popular media, a lot of people are claiming for representation, for hearing the voices of the marginalized. Do you think, as a writer, that's our burden to look for these kinds of stories? Or should we just stick to the experiences that we have?
Well, I'm against sticking to the experiences that we have because obviously I've never experienced a zombie. But I think it's a difficult thing because it feels very false if you go around, if I were to go around like representing marginalized people because I'm not. And I will never really have a true picture of that experience. And I have issues with this current obsession with cultural appropriation. But to a certain extent, it would be appropriation. It would be like taking someone's life and saying that I understand it when I cannot possibly. So I think if you have an insight into it, a real one, then yeah, you have some responsibility to make it be known. But if you don't, then you certainly, not only do you not have a responsibility, but it would be unsavory for you to try to acquire that.
So it takes a lot of self-awareness as a writer to know your limits. And
Yeah, yeah.
to go back to speculative fiction,
Yeah.
it's a very broad and a kind of new term in genre right now. What do you think is speculative fiction for you?
Well, functionally, we say that it's horror, science fiction, fantasy, and everything betwixt in between, right? I guess for me, it's the sense of, a lot of people said this internationally, it's the sense of something very strange in the story. It's the weirdness that's on the edges of all our lives that very often you have just been kept out of literature because it doesn't necessarily make sense. So in a way, speculative fiction is embracing what doesn't necessarily make sense intellectually, but especially as Filipinos, it's something that you feel as, you're not sure it's a fact, but it's a truth. Because we are a people who, you guys and me, we live in Manila. We know that witches don't exist. At the same time, we absolutely know that they live in Cebu. Right?
Exactly.
And it doesn't bother us, these two things together. So I think that's kind of what speculative fiction is and why I think it has become so embraced in Philippines.
Learning to embrace this duality of identities, Filipino and American, do you ever think there a part of you, like in the writing process, that you think, oh, this is too American, should I make it more Filipino, or is this too Filipino? Or are you just writing as you go and not think about these two different kinds of American?
Lately, I'm writing as I go. I don't think about it. Before, it used to be a struggle of working out what I need to explain and coming to terms with the idea that maybe I don't need to explain. Especially when it's a Filipino thing, I feel the need to explain because I'm writing for an international audience. And it's only been in the last decade or so that I've come to the realization that, they don't explain je ne sais quoi, right? When it appears that nobody explains that to us, I don't see why I need to explain that to them. But on the other hand, there are things I need to explain. Like I submitted a story once to, I think it was Strange Horizons, it's some international publication. They wrote back to me and they said, can we change the name of one of the characters? Because to me, Lola is a sexy woman and you're writing about an old woman. They said, oh, Lola. Not Lola. So, I started italicizing my Lola so that they know it's not a name, it's a title. So there are little things like that. Also, someone wrote to me to say, can we change your description of a mango because you said that it's golden and mangoes are orange. So I had to write to them that you only think those are mangoes. You poor, poor white people.
But that's a real thing that you have to contend with an international audience.
Yes.
Do you ever think of adjusting to it, or are you just strong-headed na this is my reality, deal with it?
I try not to adjust, but I try to. Basically, my new thing now is that things that are absolutely critical to the story that would cause chaos if they didn't understand, then I try to make it a little more clear. But if it's like incidental, like Lola is called Lola, then I just leave it. It's fine.
Because with my group of friends, we keep talking about should we italicize Tagalog words, should we italicize regional languages in stories, and my contention is no. But then at the same time, I'm also a writer from the margins. I'm from Mindanao. So when I write stories from Mindanao and the people that read it are from Manila, I kind of get what you're saying, like, oh, what does this mean? I don't understand. So there's one thing to also to push forth your own reality, but also not to alienate the reader.
I am still struggling with that myself. The italics issue, ideologically, I'm with you. We should not have to italicize anything. Fuck the world. But functionally, especially since I edit a lot of books, I found that there are things that you really need to italicize to make it clear, like someone wrote me a story where the phrase was, she made away with her sister. If you don't italicize it, it's a very different story. She made away with her sister. So, if you have to do it sometimes, at least for me as an editor, then I have to do it all the time so it's consistent. So I'm still working out how to negotiate the minefield, I guess, of cultural identity. A lot of how it is to be a writer, you're in the world and you're also this evil person who's observing the world and thinking, I can use that.
We read one of your stories, Puppy Years, and out of all your stories that we've read, that's the one that we liked the most.
Really?
One of my friends, Maxi, was talking about kasi siya yung panganay sa pamilya. So when she read the story, she thought of it as happy memories. And when the tone shifted in the last two paragraphs of how like the family started to fracture, she was surprised. Maxi, you were surprised.
I was surprised. I was like, what?
Because why is it
I
happy?
do that.
When we talked to her, I was like, Maxi, all of these memories aren't that great.
I was like, to me they are. Because I'm the older sister. I've done terrible things to my younger siblings.
Well, that's it. You know, that story is not technically speculative fiction, but
Yeah,
that is
it's not.
the feeling very strange that I wanted in it.
was.
That, you know, it starts with sunlight,
The sunlight that she couldn't.
and then it
grasp.
ends where the sunlight, you know, it can't be held on to. Most of that is true. Me and my brothers.
And I read, when we looked at the nitty-gritty details of it, we liked how you intersperse different aspects of childhood. But it's also a childhood that's, I know with your background, with American childhood, like the the references, the kinds of it was an in to a world that's not really, I never had that childhood, so I could have imagined that, but it was a perfect balance of me recognizing this childhood, but also not alienating me as well. And I think that's one of the things that we have to contend with as writers, or to push forth this our realities or the things that we come from as a background, but not necessarily push away the reader as well.
Right? You want to make it unique and yet identifiable.
So like I resonated with the idea of smallness, especially with the character, like the literal small, her being a child, but also conceptually, she never had to make decisions for herself. She always had to rely on her brothers and sisters who abused that kind of power. So when
She came into the world where a panganay comes into the world where they are the center of the universe. But all the other kids don't, right? There's someone in the sense. Makes sense. And yeah, we come from an uber small country.
So like with that, and then everything's falling apart, looking at the news right now. So it feels like that frustration we have with things not being in control, it resonated with me as a reader.
I get it, because the smallest too is that many of us have issues with our current government.
Yes.
So does the US. But there are issues everyone cares about, right? Because we are small.
What do you think is the role for the writer right now in the Philippines in English?
I think actually the role of a writer, I think anywhere, is to make people feel something or think something differently. I'm not sure I buy into the fact that we all have some great responsibility to uplift. Because frankly, I think as a writing community in general, we take ourselves too fucking seriously.
Well,
But I do think that that's it. We do have a responsibility to make people look at the world and consider it differently. And a huge part of why we write and why we read is the simple question of what would I do in that situation. So when you define a situation or you imply a situation, you outline it, then you need to be making people think, what would I do? What should I do? What am I doing? So I then don't necessarily know if that's a Filipino responsibility or a responsibility for anyone who indulges in any sort of art.
How about we make it more specific? What about women writers?
A lot of people have said that I have a tendency to write strong female characters, and I kind of resent that because I don't. I try to write real female characters, which is my great concern. It's women who are people, and part of their being people is being a woman. It's not the first thing.
Yeah.
And especially in speculative fiction, this is super important to me because in a lot of speculative fiction, historically, she's the damsel. You know, she needs to be rescued. She's basically an object, as much as the One Ring. She's a thing. And I love my Tolkien as much as the next person, but you know, you can see the time it was written in which the women don't do very much. And the one powerful woman in it tells you that she's as beautiful and terrible as the morning and the night. All shall love her and despair.
Yeah.
Right? I guess we're trying to change how people look as women. So it goes down to the same thing. It's making people think. Right? That the late Carrie Fisher said that when she was filming Star Wars, she looked at the script. Her first appearance was Princess Leia. It says, Princess Leia appears around the corner. She is staggeringly beautiful. So she took a pan, she removed Lee Beautiful. She's staggering. I thought that was brilliant because that tells you so much about Leia. You know, she's someone who, having been captured, having seen her planet destroyed, she will still go forward. She will fight to get the job done, rather than she's beautiful. What the hell does that tell you? Yeah, that's nothing. So that's it. And this is a thing I struggle with too because I think we're all raised to be sexist. So I was watching a thing on TV recently, and I kept thinking, this chef is so unattractive. And I realized that it's because she was a woman. If she were a male chef, I'd think he's unattractive and let it go. But because she's a woman, I kept thinking it because we're taught that that's important. People will say that, oh, I know this great girl. She's beautiful and she's smart. Because it's like equally important. It bothers me. So it's not that I'm interested in strong women. I'm interested in women as whole people. And I think that's how we as women writers should represent women as much as possible. And that means including flaws. Because the other side of this woman is a cipher and there's nothing to her is that this woman is perfect. I think we should all be writing real people, male or female, or robot or city.
So thank you, Ma'am Nikki, for your time and your many anecdotes.
It's just Nikki.